When tragedy strikes, whether it's a violent crime, unattended death, or biohazard situation, there's more to the job than just restoring a space. Trauma cleanup professionals are often the first to arrive after emergency services leave, stepping into emotionally charged environments where empathy, discretion, and professionalism are just as critical as technical skill. Today, we explore the human side of trauma cleanup, why compassion matters, how technicians navigate grief and shock, and what it takes to provide more than just a clean space. Our guest brings deep experience from the front lines of crisis response, offering insights into what it truly means to serve people at their most vulnerable. So, to do this at this time, I'm pleased to welcome Jordan Frady with First Onsite Property Restoration. Jordan, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
So, Jordan, we don't know you. So we just met a few minutes ago as we got on
Yeah,
this recording. Tell us about yourself, a little history and what you do at First On Site.
yeah. So as you said, first on-site property restoration. I've been a project supervisor here for roughly the last year. Really getting into the commercial side of property restoration, doing a lot of healthcare work in hospitals. You know, water damage, mold, fire, reconstruction. But before that, the last 4 or 5 years prior to this last year, was pretty much all spent in the trauma and crime scene cleanup space. That's where most of my experience and training, comes from. So I spent, like I said, probably better part of 4 or 5 years doing residential trauma and crime scene cleanup, from small blood spills to multiple homicide, tear gas, SWAT responding, um, a lot of working with individual families, property management, housing authority, police departments, different things like that.
The world you've worked in, Jordan, is one that many talk about doing. I'm not sure how many can actually do the work because
Yeah,
there's so much to it that's emotional and psychological, and we're going to get into that. But
right.
thank you for doing what you do because we need people like you to do this work and to take care of people who suffer through these situations.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
But let's start with this easy question. We're thinking about the human side of trauma cleanup and why compassion matters. And I think this is probably an easy question, but why is this an important topic to you as you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I personally have been able to experience what we can provide to the families and the people going through this. So, like I said, it's really easy to think about like the families, going in and finding a loved one, someone who is incredibly important to you, deceased, and having to see that and the trauma that comes with that. But even just the property management and like maintenance personnel on apartment complexes and stuff like that. I mean, I was very surprised to find out how many of them have relationships with some of the residents and or just never signed up to discover bodies and have to do that. I mean, a lot of times maintenance personnel are the first ones. Hey, we haven't received rent this month. Can you go do a welfare check? They open the door and they're the ones making that initial discovery sometimes, and they weren't ever prepared for that, and so going in and helping them through that in a certain sense is what makes it easy to kind of keep going back and keep doing it.
So let's dig into that a little bit because, yeah, I never thought about the property managers being the ones.
Yeah.
I guess in my mind, I've never really did this work. I did a couple when I had my cleaning company, couple of jobs that maybe I shouldn't have done, Jordan, but a long time ago, a different world, and
Yeah.
something had to be done. But we often think family's going to find them, but that's not the case. But let's talk about that. Talk about the emotional or psychological state that those that have discovered a situation like this, whether it's a suicide or a natural death, whether it's a worker or a family member, what have you noticed about that? And how do you adapt your approach to handle that?
Right. I think the biggest thing is that there is no one answer. So every individual in every single scenario can present completely different. And so with that understanding, I kind of, when we get that initial call and I'm responding to, the scene, I'm going into it kind of with no expectations on that person, because I've shown up and you would think nothing's happened. Like they're laughing, they're telling jokes, and like we're just having a normal conversation. And like the first couple times, it was like, am I at the right place? Am I talking to the right person? Other times it's completely hysterical, emotional, just sobbing, yelling. Sometimes it's just very quiet and somber. There's just not very much being communicated. They just can't, they don't have it in them to even say any words. Um, it can be anger, it can be anger that ends up getting presented towards us, even though we haven't, as a restorer, we haven't done anything, wrong, hopefully ever, but at this point, but it's just anger towards a situation that gets presented to us because a lot of times we're there, only a couple of hours after whatever the incident is that happened, and so we're getting those very initial emotions that are first hitting them. So just going in with no expectations for how they should or shouldn't feel, because there is no right answer for how they should process this situation.
So, yeah, different emotions you're dealing with. People display those emotions in different ways.
Right.
Let's talk about technicians because some of those watching might be owner operators and they do this work and they know what they're doing. It's their business. But when you hire technicians to do this work,
Right.
what are your thoughts on training to train those technicians to prepare them for what you just described? Because maybe they've never been there themselves.
It's definitely an interesting aspect, and it's you know at a bare minimum, making sure that they have an understanding for what it is that they're signing up to do and what they could potentially go into. Because even if a lot of people's setup is basically to kind of completely separate uh, the technicians from speaking to family members. Like, your all your focus is get in there and do the work that needs to get done. We have XYZ personnel to handle communication with the family. Even then, they can hear uh, things, see things that if they weren't expecting to do that, could definitely leave them with some kind of emotional turmoil. There's when as soon as you bring this up, what I think of, I was a lead technician at the time. It was me and one other technician. We were finishing up. We were on like the last day of a attempted homicide suicide. He was 12 to 14-year-old boy that attacked his parents. That's why it was attempted homicide. They ended up both being okay, and then he ended up taking his own life in the room. And we were there for probably a good 6, 7 days. It was a lot of damage. He used a high-powered rifle in a very small apartment room. So there was a lot of work to do, a lot of contents to go through. Um, so around the last day, we hadn't seen the family was in the hospital the whole time that we were there. So there was like pretty much no communication with them. Very last day, we're wrapping up. We're kind of doing some final touch cleaning, making sure everything looks very nice, presentable, clean. And the family shows up to go inside and grab some clothes. They haven't had a fresh pair of clothes in a good 5, 6 days. And we had our containment set up and signed and stuff like that, so they weren't able to go into the area quite yet. But they went by it, and they went by the son's room, which they explicitly asked us to keep that room untouched, leave it exactly how it was, and that room was unaffected, so it was pretty easy to do that. Um, After coming up and grabbing some clothes, the mother went back downstairs, and we were trying to not do too much up there because they were going to leave, so we're trying to just be quiet, let them do their thing, and let them leave peacefully. And both of us were just sitting there looking at each other, and the mother just started. You could. This is what I imagine happened. How it played out in my head was she dropped to the ground. That's what it sounded like, and just started this gut wrenching scream, crying of the son's name, like why, and chanting the son's name pretty much, and just crying. And I remember the look on both of our face, like we both, me and the technician that was there, like we both had a mutual understanding of like this is real, like this is intense and this is real. And that was an experience that led me to realizing that like some of these jobs we really need to be coming back and having some kind of debrief, making sure that everyone's good. Just hearing that kind of stuff. There was no interaction from the technician side to that client and we still experience that traumatic event.
Do you think there's enough emotional support or help for those like yourself and that technician that are in that situation and it has to affect you?
Yeah.
Is there help out there? Do you have some thoughts that might help others to deal with this type of trauma, emotional trauma?
Yeah, I think it's an aspect that can definitely be easily overlooked. I think especially, there's, I guess it's kind of 50-50, or you have companies that specifically do kind of the trauma work, and then you have a lot of companies that are just kind of overall restorations. And, the same technicians who might be going out doing these trauma scenes are doing, the water and the mold and the fire jobs and all that kind of stuff. Um, which there are some traumatic events that kind of lead into those other jobs too, but a little bit different on this side. And so I think, from a very, very basic level is kind of having that open environment of communication with the team of, hey, when you guys get back from a job, if it's something that we need to talk about, like, that we're here and that we've been through some of these same experiences, that you can let us know you're not weak or anything like that for feeling some kind of emotional response to, a type of job. Offering some kind of counseling services is usually good. There are definitely some jobs that require that. Um, um, yeah, I mean, just being really open, I feel like having that open communication. For me, I know anything that involves kids, any scene that involves kids is usually more of a touchy subject. And so I would usually present that to technicians, especially, we had two that had a family of their own. And it was like, hey, just so you know, this scene we're going to go to did involve a child. Like, do you feel comfortable going, basically? Um, and allow them, to opt out if they can. If certain scene hits too close to home for some reason, we don't need you going out there. There's no reason for you to take that on today.
So I think it's probably standard procedure to know what you're going into before you
For the
go.
most part, yeah. I mean, you're
Mhm.
trying to do some fact gathering before it happens. We don't always get that privilege. Sometimes it's just get out there and we're kind of piecing it together as it goes. But usually we have at least some basic understanding, whether it's from, the family property management themselves, or it's even, the first responders, someone giving that information.
Thank you. Are there any common or big misconceptions that people have about trauma cleanup that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, from like a regulatory standards type aspect, it is relatively new, right? So a lot of people are familiar with IRCRC. A lot of people are familiar with those standards, S500, S520. You say those to most restorers and they immediately know what that is. S540, which is the standard for trauma and crime scene cleanup, the very first edition only came out in 2017. So we're not talking about this industry that's had standards around it for decades, like you may have had for water and mold. So kind of as you hinted to it in a joking manner earlier, as far as you did a couple jobs that back then is a little bit different. Back then was not that long ago, and it was a little bit different. And so the more that we're getting professionals out there advocating for these services and what things need to be happening with them, those we see those standards increasing. As the standard S540 came out and now second edition's out. There's more. IRC now has the TCST, course specifically around this. Organizations like ABRA has certifications. Um, so, that misconception, I think, is that it's just kind of a mess to go into and kind of clean up. Whereas it's like, no, there are some serious hazards involved with this, emotionally, which we've hit on quite a bit, but then also the physical hazards.
Well, full disclosure, when I did my couple of jobs, I don't remember if it was two or three. Well, it was at least two. One was a death, an older person had died. There was body
Mm,
fluids that was on the floor. The other one was a double murder, and they killed the dog too. And I was in that
jeez.
home, imagination running wild, and it was a mess. We didn't have that standard. We didn't have these guidelines. It was
Yeah,
very little information, but I did what I could, and but I'm glad we now have those resources you mentioned from IICRC and training as well. So,
right.
but those scenes stick to your in your head, and not everyone, would you agree, is cut out for this?
100%. Definitely not. a funny example of that, if you will, is we had we were looking for a technician. We hired someone on as whatever the title was, a crime and trauma scene technician, right? Should be pretty clear as day. The job description very much mentioned what type of scenes you might be going to. And very first job, left in the middle of the job and was like, I can't handle seeing blood. And like, we're kind of like, what did you expect this was going to be? Um, but to your point, it's definitely not for everyone. Just because you're already in restoration does not mean necessarily that you should get into this side of it, whether it's from physically seeing what's there on the scene to emotionally being able to handle the clients, the families, the property management, hearing those stories and being able to process that and still get through the job professionally and be able to have enough in you to kind of continue going on.
Mm. That being said, a lot of people look at it as a business opportunity. Revenue is there.
Yeah.
They're thinking about that. You have to really balance the potential revenue to the emotional impact as well. But let's talk. My final question, Jordan, would be for those that are thinking that they're doing restoration or they're doing cleaning. I was a carpet and upholstery cleaner. That was my focus,
Yeah.
and then those trauma jobs came up or biohazard scenes. But what would you tell someone who's thinking about jumping in and doing this? What maybe some top advice you would offer them to wrap it up?
Yeah. Um, it's a good question for sure. Um, I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, what is your why? Like, what is your reasoning behind wanting to go into it? Because I think we already have, and every industry has it, right? You have those bad apples that set, a bad example of what the industry could be. Many people that are already in this field, a couple of names already come to mind. So knowing your why, if you're just in this for the revenue that you discussed, the profitability, those types of aspects, you have the potential to really damage people. This is people's real lives, and we may do 10 jobs in a week, right? And so by Friday, you may already forget about exactly what it was you did on Monday. That family is never going to forget who showed up, what the name of that company was, what the name of that supervisor was that made contact with them, and what impact, what feelings you gave them, and how you made that process. So you very much have the ability to impact whether or not this is a start of a healing journey for them or a painful start to their healing journey that they have to go on. So knowing your why, I think, is huge. And then um, the training, make sure you have proper training, obviously. Make sure that you know how to protect yourself, of course, but then that leads into being able to turn over a safe, clean environment for that property, whatever that family, household, apartment, whatever it is. So get curious, dig into the knowledge, the training. There's so much free resources out there. Of course, there's the ones that you pay for when you want to get into a little bit higher level, but there's a lot of stuff. I've spent a lot of time reading articles on clean facts, talking to different people. A big thing now in the industry is like Facebook groups. There's a lot of Facebook groups for restoration professionals and stuff like that. And most of the people in the industry are very willing to share that information. They want people to do it right. And so if you have genuine questions and you want to learn, there's someone out there ready to give you that information and help you learn the right way.
Thank you, Jordan. You mentioned clean facts. Well, that's where this interview is going to end up.
Yeah,
So, thank you for these words of advice. And anyone thinking about doing this, that why question was powerful to me. That's a very good point. Jordan, thank you.
thank you.